Hello and welcome. And the topic of these days having to do with this wonderfully broad and somewhat vague word, concept of love, is related to how deeply intimate this practice of Buddhism, mindfulness, loving kindness, Brahmaviharas, how deeply intimate it can go to the deepest places within, the most intimate, sometimes private places within, the places of some of the greatest beauty and greatest sorrow that we carry with us. And that part of the orientation of Dharma practice, this practice we do, is to care for the depth of who we are, the depth of other people, to understand that the surface presentations, that what we present, what we see in others, represents maybe tip of an iceberg of something that's quite deep and history of challenges and joys and losses and capacities of deep peace and capacities of deep love and joy that that we sometimes touch into, sometimes we can't. And so to be in this world with a profound sense of almost reverence, almost deep care for the preciousness of it. And that's how we can sit. That meditation is not about simply stress reduction. It's not about becoming calmer. Of course, that's part of it. But at the essence of this kind of Dharma practice meditation is to sit and practice, to be able to make room for, to touch, to care for, to orient ourselves to the present moment so that we can meet, be with what is most valuable here with us, an attitude of deep care and reverence for this life and for ourselves and for others. So to begin, gently closing your eyes, gently becoming aware of how you're breathing without breathing any particular way. Just how is it to be in this breathing body? How is it to check in to this human being that you are, the human being that you're closest to physically and maybe emotionally? All human beings are valuable, important. All human beings, including oneself, breathing in a simple way, eyes closed. Where do you go inside of you? So you begin approaching a sense of care and value and preciousness of being alive. Where is it that you feel there's an aliveness within that reminds you of the preciousness of life, that reminds you that you too can be cared for, can be touched. You too can be held in a deep, caring attention. I talked to someone recently who lives, spends time in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, the place where there's a lot of homeless. And he sits with them and talks, and all he says he does is listen to them. And they thank him so deeply. People who are in all kinds of different difficult states of mind, to be listened to respectfully, and to hear and now with yourself, to think of meditation as a deep, silent listening to what is deep within you, here, now. Gently, ever so gently, to appreciate an inner connection to breathing, and to breathe a little bit deeper, fuller, and relax, soften on the exhale. Just a little bit fuller than usual, as if the breathing is taking you by your hand and gently guiding you, leading you into yourself, lowering yourself into your center, your heart, the grounding place deep inside, as if you're approaching what is most intimate, where you're going to listen from and what you're going to listen to. A silent presence. Letting your breathing return to normal. Maybe with the exhale being still, a gentle guidance, guiding you deeper and deeper inside. Allowing the exhale to be an invitation to quiet the mind, the thinking mind, so you can better sense and feel and listen to the most intimate, deepest places within, however accessible it is. as we continue, you might quietly say to yourself the word care, either verbally or a kind of non-verbal way of bringing forth or naming or recognizing a deep potential for caring, like loving care, caring love for yourself with every breath. Maybe the inhale, maybe the exhale, maybe both, is the gentle wave that carries your care, a care that can only be in the present moment, a care which is lost if we wander off in thought. Stay here. Offer caring attention to whatever is, even to the wandering off mind. perhaps allowing care and love or kindness be the doorway to a deep present moment attention, deep connection to yourself with breathing, being the invitation to go through that door. And to sit in kindness, in care, in the middle of this living moment of now. It's so easy to be identified with our thoughts, identified with our emotions and feelings, with our stories. For these few minutes here, shift your identity to the soft, gentle way of care and love and kindness, caring attention, kind mindfulness, loving presence. Let that be what is the center of all things. And as we come to the end of this sitting, to begin here with caring for yourself from the depth of your being, to care for your body, your heart, your mind, where caring means to value, to appreciate, to love, to take care of. And to do that for yourself, to cherish yourself, because that is the basis for your care to spread further, to not be limited or held back by yourself, but to care deeply, to be present, so the care as it becomes unlimited, spreading outward into the world. Where there's some aspect, some core, some nature of every human being on the planet that is worthy of care, worthy of kindness, worthy of offering a basic human dignity. Everyone will benefit from being listened to by someone who can listen deeply. May it be that our care, our caring capacity to know and to listen, may it help us to have kindness and friendliness to everyone we encounter. May our practice of meditation support us to be open and boundless, in our ability to value every person we encounter. May all beings be happy. May all beings be safe. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free. Thank you. Hello and welcome to this third talk on this series on love. And as I've said, the word love is broad and somewhat vague, but I'm using it here as an umbrella term for some of the most profound social emotions that are pointed to or are awoken to in Buddhist practice. And they include the Brahma Viharas of goodwill, compassion, appreciative joy, and loving equanimity. It includes something even broader, the anukampa, or care, profound caring that values and appreciates and offers to take care of this world of ours. And one of the great little stories in the Buddhist tradition is that of a conversation that the Buddha reports about that it reports upon between a king and a queen. And the king, we might want to consider, was a little bit used to being center stage, and maybe the most important person. Maybe he had some conceit even. But he asks his wife, the queen, who she considers to be most dear, most cherished, most loved. And maybe the expectation he has is she's going to say him because he's the husband or the king, or maybe because they're good friends. And she replies that she herself is what is most dear for herself. And so he's a little bit surprised by this. So they decide to go to the Buddha and ask him about this conversation they had. And the Buddha concurs with the queen that yes, for each person is most dear for themselves. Now I know that that's not actually the case for many people. That for some people, themselves is who's most difficult. Oneself is the person that they are ready to find fault with and see the shortcomings of, and almost they're willing to offer loving care to anyone but themselves, but the switch in Buddhist practice is to learn to appreciate that it's healthy and appropriate to have deep care, to hold oneself as being dear, deep care for oneself. That each of us warrants that. It's appropriate. And no matter what your crime has been, you are the one to care for the most deeply. That you are the one that you can make the most difference to. And one reason I think it's difficult for us sometimes to have real deep, profound care and respect and sense of inner dignity for ourselves is because we identify too strongly with our thoughts, with our judgments, our opinions. We identify too strongly with the profound social persona that's been reinforced by so many different messages that we receive from society, from people around us, of how we should be, supposed to be. And so it keeps us out of touch with the depth of who we are. It keeps us spinning in the world of thoughts and ideas and stories and that we make up and judgments we have. And of course, some of us have shortcomings. Of course, some of us have done things which maybe we're not proud of. And but that's not a reason to not dip deep inside and to appreciate that you too are worthy of being listened to deeply. That each of us is worthy of our place as a human being, to be heard and known, and to kind of find a way to really blossom and grow and heal from the inside out by doing the equivalent of listening to ourselves deeply. It's remarkable how people who are in spiritual care professions, people who spend a lot of time one-on-one offering care to others. That one of the most important things to offer is to listen deeply. And as I mentioned earlier today, that I talked to a man recently who lives in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, and he says, every hour there are people who are maybe drug-induced or mental illness-induced, kind of screaming on the streets and sirens, and a lot of people taking drugs and selling drugs. It's a kind of difficult place in San Francisco, the place called the Tenderloin. And he lives in a kind of, assisted, temporary residence there. But he spends time on the street with people. He's kind of a chaplain himself. And he stops and listens to people and hears their stories. It breaks his heart sometimes, the stories he hears. But he's surprised by how much meaningful it is for people to be able to tell their story, to be listened to in a deep way. And whether it's, in people who are homeless, or whether it's our friends, and whether it's people who are, relatively well off, it's remarkable what happens when we listen deeply. I've learned that not to judge people by their surface appearance, because that really doesn't represent their hearts, doesn't represent what's most deep. And to listen. And I tell you all this because we can listen to ourselves. This idea that the Buddha says that we ourselves are the most dear person for ourselves means that it's important to care for ourselves. It's invaluable to listen and dip deep down and really discover how to be present in a full and caring way. In such a way that we begin to appreciate that mindfulness practice is a form of deep listening care, a deep form of caring listening, and the ability to really start abiding, resting in the present moment is not just because the present moment is wonderful, but rather the present moment is the only place, only way that we can really allow for this very deep cherishing, caring, listening, touching that which is deepest in us, that wants to be heard, wants to be held. So I want to tell you one story that I love, that I think it comes from one of the great epic tales of India, the Mahabharata. And it's a story of Krishna is walking with a companion in the woods, and at some point Krishna hears a voice very faintly calling his name. And he asks the companion, "Do you hear that voice?" And the companion, "No, I don't hear anything." But then Krishna begins walking towards the voice that's calling his name. And as he gets closer, he asks his companion again, "Do you hear that voice?" "No." And they walk closer still, and they come up against a big boulder. And for Krishna, that voice is coming out of the boulder. "Do you hear that voice?" The companion says, "No, I don't hear it." And so then Krishna comes and puts his hand on the boulder. And that causes the boulder to break open. And deep inside there's some wonderful person who has been petrified by some wizard in that rock. And only Krishna could somehow break that spell. So this idea of what has been petrified in us, what is it that's calling us? Do you get quiet enough so that you can hear how you are calling yourself? It's a voice that no one else can hear for you. And yes, it might be hard. Yes, there might be resistance in places that are closed inside of you. But deep inside of it, something is calling your name. Here, come here. Listen carefully. And in the story, the idea of this soft, gentle hands just holding and touching the rock. What is it in you that needs to be touched and cared for in some deep way? And you're allowed to be who you are. You're allowed to be with how you are. There's so much room in Buddhism to deep respect and care and attention to exactly how you are. But listen deeply. Listen to the one who's listening with an open heart to it all. And maybe you too will, break out of the petrified way, the holding, the resistance that we all have. And where it's worth it. And so this Buddhist practice, the Dharma practice, is both for ourselves and for others. It's not for one or the other, but it often begins with ourselves, so that we listen, care, deeply here for ourselves, so that then inevitably we'll better able to care for others. Listen to yourself deeply, and that depth will teach you how to listen to others deeply, a deep listening to them. So, thank you as we go through these kinds of introductory week to this topic of love, and before we start actually practicing a little bit more formally with the loving kindness practice of our tradition. So thank you very much, and I have one announcement. Next Tuesday at 6 p.m. in California time, I'm going to have on Zoom through the Sati Center a conversation with Mohsen Modani, and he was one of the Columbia students, Palestinian students, who was detained by ICE, and they tried to deport him, and he was in jail for a while, detention for a while. And the paradox is that he is the opposite of a terrorist, opposite of someone instigating violence or hatred. Well before he was arrested, he was actively involved in the university building bridges between Jews and Palestinians and friendships between them. He was also the president of the Columbia University Buddhist Association. So he has a deep Buddhist practice. And so I have the wonderful privilege to have a public conversation with him that follows up a little bit to the conversation I had with a Palestinian and Israeli Dharma teacher in August, or no, I guess it was maybe October. So some of you might appreciate this conversation, and I think part of the topic of this conversation with him will be love as an alternative to fear. So so that's at the Sati Center. You can look for it there. Sati Center for Buddhist Studies. So thank you, and I look forward to our continued exploration of love.